The first time I noticed him, it was 2:17 in the morning. I know the exact time because I couldn't sleep that night. My mind was racing, the way it sometimes does when everything around you is too quiet. So I got up, walked into the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water. That's when I saw him, standing in the window of the house across the street, watching me. At first, I thought it was nothing, just someone awake late like me. Maybe he was grabbing a snack. Maybe he couldn't sleep either. But the strange thing was, he wasn't moving, not even a little, just standing there, perfectly still, looking directly into my house. I froze in the kitchen. The lights were off in my living room, but the soft glow from the streetlight outside illuminated enough for me to see the silhouette clearly. A man, tall, broad shoulders, standing in the second-floor window of the house across from mine, and he was facing straight toward me, toward my kitchen, toward me. For a moment, I convinced myself I was being paranoid. Maybe he wasn't even looking at me. Maybe he was just staring out the window. But then something happened that made my stomach drop. He raised his hand and waved. Slowly, I stepped back immediately. My heart started racing. Why would someone wave at 2 in the morning? And more importantly, how long had he been standing there before I noticed? I turned off the kitchen light instantly. The room went dark. Now I could barely see outside, but the silhouette in the window was still visible under the dim streetlight glow. Still standing there, still watching. I stayed perfectly still for almost a minute. Then I slowly peeked out again, and he was gone. The window across the street was empty, just darkness. I told myself it was nothing, just a neighbor, maybe a weird one, but still just a neighbor. At least that's what I thought, until it started happening every night. 3 weeks earlier, I had moved into the house. It was a small 2-story place in a quiet suburban neighborhood outside Portland. The kind of street where kids rode bikes during the day and everything went silent after 9 p.m. I had just started a new job working remotely as a graphic designer, which meant most nights I stayed up late finishing projects. The house itself was great. Cheap rent, big windows, and a small backyard surrounded by tall trees. Honestly, it felt like the perfect place for a fresh start. My closest neighbor lived directly across the street. His house was almost identical to mine. Same structure, same windows, same second-floor bedroom facing the street. But unlike my house, his place always seemed dark, quiet, still. The first time I saw him during the day was a few days after moving in. I was taking the trash out when his front door opened. A man stepped outside. He looked to be in his late 40s or early 50s. Tall, thin, with graying hair and a pale face that made him look older than he probably was. He glanced at me briefly, not smiling, not nodding, just looking. Then he walked to his mailbox and went back inside. That was the entire interaction. After that, I didn't see him much. Occasionally, I'd notice his car parked outside, a dark blue sedan that looked at least 15 years old. But most days, the house seemed empty. No lights, no sounds, no movement, which is why the night I saw him in the window felt so strange. The next night, I stayed up late again. Around 1:40 a.m., I went to the kitchen for water, and before I even reached the sink, I looked across the street. My stomach tightened instantly. He was there again, standing in the same window, looking directly at my house. This time he didn't wave. He didn't move at all, just stood there, watching. I pulled the curtain shut immediately. My heart was beating faster now. 2 nights in a row. Same time, same place, same window. I tried to laugh it off. Maybe he's just weird, I told myself. But something about it didn't feel normal, because people don't usually stand completely still at a window in the middle of the night. Not for long periods of time. The 3rd night, it happened again. And the 4th night, and the 5th. Every night around 2 a.m., I'd see him standing in that same window, watching my house. Sometimes I'd turn the lights off quickly. Sometimes I'd pretend not to notice. But no matter what I did, he was always there. And then one night, things got worse. Much worse. It was a Thursday. I had just finished working on a design project around 2:05 a.m. My eyes were tired from staring at the computer screen for hours. So I stood up, stretched, and walked into the kitchen. I didn't even think about the window this time. Not until I reached the sink. Then I looked up, and my stomach dropped instantly. The window across the street was empty. For the first time in over a week. He wasn't there. At first, I felt relieved. Maybe the whole thing was over. Maybe he had just been going through some weird insomnia phase. But that relief only lasted about 3 seconds. Because when I turned around, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Someone was standing in my backyard, right outside my kitchen window, watching me. And even in the darkness, I knew exactly who it was. The man from across the street. The moment I saw him standing in my backyard, my entire body froze. At first, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. The backyard light was off, but the dim glow from the kitchen made his figure visible through the window. The same tall silhouette, the same broad shoulders, the same man who had been standing in the window across the street every night. Except now, he wasn't across the street anymore. He was 10 feet away from me, watching. I dropped the glass of water in my hand. It shattered against the kitchen floor. The sound echoed through the quiet house, but the man outside didn't move. He didn't flinch. He just stood there, looking directly at me. My heart started racing so fast it felt like it might explode. I slowly stepped backward, trying not to make any sudden movements. But my eyes stayed locked on him. Even through the darkness, I could see his face more clearly now. Pale, expressionless, almost emotionless, like he had been expecting me to turn around. Then he did something that made my blood run cold. He smiled. Not a friendly smile. Not a neighborly smile. It was slow, unnatural, like he had been waiting all night for that exact moment. I stumbled backward and ran straight to the living room. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone. The first instinct was to call the police, but I hesitated. What would I say? My neighbor is standing in my backyard. He wasn't breaking in. He wasn't attacking anyone. He was just standing there. Creepy? Yes. Illegal? I wasn't sure. Instead, I locked the back door, then the front door, then every window I could find. By the time I returned to the kitchen, the backyard was empty. He was gone. I stood there staring through the glass for a long time. The backyard looked normal again. Just trees, grass, and darkness. But the feeling that someone had been standing there, watching me, refused to go away. I barely slept that night. Every little sound made my heart jump. Floor creaks, wind against the house, branches scraping the roof. Everything suddenly felt louder, closer, like someone was just outside the walls. The next morning, I walked outside to check the yard. The air was cold and quiet. For a moment, I wondered if I had imagined the whole thing. But then I noticed something near the fence. Footprints, fresh ones, leading directly toward my kitchen window. My stomach tightened. They were large, boot prints, and they stopped just a few feet from the glass, exactly where the man had been standing. I quickly looked across the street. His house looked exactly the same as always. Silent, dark, still, but something felt different now. Before, he had been watching from a distance. Now he had crossed the street. That night, I kept every curtain in the house closed, every light on. I told myself that if he couldn't see inside, maybe he'd lose interest. Maybe he'd stop. But around 2 a.m., curiosity got the better of me. I slowly pulled the curtain back, just a few inches, and looked across the street. My chest tightened immediately. He was there again, standing in the window, watching my house. Except this time, the light behind him was on, and for the first time, I could see the room clearly. What I saw made my stomach twist, because the wall behind him was covered in photographs, dozens of them, pinned everywhere, like some kind of collage. And even from across the street, I could tell what the photos were. They were pictures of my house, different angles, different times of day, some taken during the afternoon, some at night, and some looked like they had been taken from much closer than across the street. My hands started shaking. How long had he been taking these pictures? Days, weeks, months. Then I noticed something worse. One of the photos wasn't of the house. It was of me, standing in my driveway, carrying groceries, taken from across the street. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just a creepy neighbor. This was someone who had been watching me for a long time. I stepped back from the window immediately, my heart pounding in my ears. I grabbed my phone again. This time, I didn't hesitate. I called the police. An officer arrived about 20 minutes later, a tall man with a calm voice and a tired expression. I explained everything. The man in the window, the backyard, the footprints, the photos. The officer walked outside with me and looked across the street. The neighbor's house was dark again. No lights, no silhouette in the window, nothing. Have you spoken to him before? The officer asked. Once, I said. Does he live there alone? I think so. The officer nodded slowly. I'll knock on his door. We walked across the street together. My heart raced with every step. The closer we got, the more nervous I felt, because something told me this wasn't going to end well. The officer knocked. Once, twice, 3 times. No answer. Then he tried the doorknob. It turned. The door slowly creaked open. The officer looked inside, then stepped back, his expression suddenly serious. Sir, he said quietly, you might want to see this. I stepped forward and looked into the house. What I saw made my blood run cold, because every wall inside the living room was covered with photographs, hundreds of them, all of my house, all of me, every single night. But the worst part wasn't the pictures. It was the camera sitting on the table, still pointed directly at my front window, and the man who had been watching me every night was nowhere inside the house. The moment I stepped inside the house, I felt sick. Every wall in the living room was covered in photos, hundreds of them. Some were printed normally, others were pinned to corkboards. A few were taped directly to the walls, but every single one had the same subject. My house, different angles, different times of day, morning, afternoon, night. Some photos showed my front door, some showed my backyard, some were zoomed in on the windows. But what made my stomach twist was the photos that had me in them. One showed me carrying groceries inside. Another showed me mowing the lawn. One showed me sitting on the porch talking on the phone. And then there were the ones taken at night, through my windows, inside my house. I felt my chest tighten. How did he take these? I asked. The police officer didn't answer right away. He walked closer to the table in the center of the room. That's where the camera was. A large professional camera mounted on a tripod, still aimed directly toward my house. The officer picked up one of the photos. This one was taken tonight. My stomach dropped. What? He pointed to the timestamp in the corner. 1:58 a.m. Only minutes before I had looked across the street, which meant something terrifying. If the camera took that photo, then someone had to be here to press the shutter. But when we arrived, the house was empty. Sir, the officer said, stay close to me. He pulled out his flashlight and began walking deeper into the house. The place smelled stale, like no one had opened the windows in months. The furniture was old, dusty, barely used. But the walls told a completely different story. The photos didn't stop in the living room. They continued down the hallway, into the kitchen, even into the dining room. I followed the officer slowly, trying not to look too closely at the pictures. But it was impossible. Some of them were taken from angles that made no sense, angles that shouldn't have been possible from across the street. One photo made me stop cold. It showed me sitting on my couch, watching TV, taken from inside my living room window. My heart started racing again. That's inside my house. The officer looked at it carefully. You're sure? Yes. The angle was wrong. The shot was too close. This photo had been taken from somewhere near the backyard, or worse, from inside the house. The officer's expression changed. Let's keep moving. We continued down the hallway until we reached the back of the house. There was a door there, half open. Basement, the officer asked. I don't know. The house wasn't mine. It belonged to the neighbor. But something about that door felt wrong. The officer slowly pushed it open. A narrow staircase descended into darkness. He turned on his flashlight. Stay behind me. I nodded. My hands were shaking again. The stairs creaked with every step. and the air grew colder as we went down. At the bottom of the stairs, we both stopped. The basement was filled with more photos, but these weren't on the walls. They were spread across a large table, organized, categorized, like some kind of research project. My stomach dropped again, because the photos weren't just of my house anymore. They were of me, dozens of them, walking, working, sleeping, even sitting at my computer late at night. And that's when the realization hit me. These photos weren't taken from across the street. They were taken from inside my house. My voice shook. He's been inside my house. The officer looked around the basement carefully. Then his flashlight stopped on something in the corner. A small monitor, connected to several wires. He walked closer, and suddenly his expression turned serious. "Sir, come look at this." The monitor showed a split screen, for different camera angles, all inside my house. One showed my living room, one showed the kitchen, one showed the hallway, and one showed my bedroom. My entire body went cold. He has cameras in my house. The officer nodded slowly. "We need to find where those feeds are coming from." Then something unexpected happened. One of the screens flickered. Movement appeared in the hallway camera. I stared at the monitor, my heart pounding. The hallway inside my house was empty for a moment. Then suddenly, someone walked across the frame. A man, tall, thin, the same man who had been watching me from a window. My chest tightened. "He's in my house right now." The officer grabbed his radio immediately. "We need backup." But before he could say anything else, another screen flickered, the kitchen camera, and what we saw next made my blood run cold. Because the man wasn't alone. Someone else stepped into the frame behind him. Another figure, standing silently in my kitchen. I whispered, "There are two of them." The officer looked at the screen again, but his expression suddenly changed. Not fear, not shock, something worse, confusion. "Sir," he said slowly, "look closer." I leaned in. My stomach dropped instantly, because the second figure looked exactly like me. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The screen in the basement showed my kitchen. The man who had been watching me every night was standing near the counter. But behind him, there was another figure, and the shape of that person looked exactly like me. Same height, same build, same clothes. My mind refused to accept what I was seeing. "That's not possible," I whispered. The police officer leaned closer to the monitor. Then he spoke quietly. "That's not you." I looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" He pointed at the screen. "Look at the timestamp." I focused on the small digital numbers in the corner of the video feed. 2:13 a.m., but it was already 2:45 a.m. in real time. My stomach tightened. "This isn't live." The officer nodded. "These are recordings." Relief washed over me for half a second, until I realized something even worse. If the footage was recorded earlier tonight, then that meant the man had been inside my house before we arrived. How long ago was this recorded? I asked. The officer began checking the other camera feeds. Each one had a slightly different timestamp. 2:05 a.m., 2:09 a.m., 2:12 a.m. All of them showed the same thing. The man walking around my house. Slowly, quietly, like he had done it many times before. Then the second figure appeared again in another clip, standing near my living room window. Watching him, just standing there. The officer replayed the clip, this time slower. My heart started pounding again, because the closer I looked, the more I realized something strange. The second person didn't actually look like me. Not exactly. The shape was similar, but the face was different. You couldn't see it clearly. Just a shadow, standing perfectly still. "Who is that?" I asked. The officer didn't answer. Instead, he paused the footage, then zoomed in on the reflection in the TV screen behind the figure. My blood ran cold, because the reflection showed the face clearly. And it wasn't mine. It was the neighbor's face. I blinked in confusion. How is that possible? The officer stared at the screen carefully. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. "Because this video isn't showing two different people." He paused. "It's showing the same person twice." I didn't understand. "What do you mean?" The officer rewound the clip again. This time we watched the entire thing carefully. The first man entered my kitchen, then walked into the living room. A few minutes later, he appeared again in the kitchen, standing in the exact same position, like a second version of himself. But it wasn't a second person. It was the same man, recorded at different times, edited together. The officer looked around the basement. This guy has been studying you for a long time. Why? To learn your routine. My chest tightened. So he could break in? The officer shook his head. No. His voice grew quieter. Something worse. He pointed to a stack of notebooks on the table. We opened one. Every page was filled with writing. Dates, times, notes, observations. 2 a.m. Lights off in bedroom. 2:10 a.m. Goes to kitchen. 2:15 a.m. Stands near window. It was my routine, documented every single night, for weeks, maybe months. Then we found something even worse. A hand-drawn map of my house. Every room, every door, every window, even the placement of furniture. The officer turned the page, and there was one final note written at the bottom. 3 words, underlined twice. Ready tonight. My stomach dropped. Tonight. The officer checked the timestamp again. The notebook entry had been written at 1:50 a.m., less than an hour before we arrived. That's when we heard something upstairs. A loud creak. The officer's head snapped toward the basement stairs. Did you hear that? Yes. My heart started racing again, because the sound had come from the living room above us. The officer grabbed his flashlight. Stay behind me. We moved slowly up the stairs. Each step felt heavier than the last. When we reached the top, the living room was empty, but the front door was open. Cold night air drifted inside, and in the distance, we heard footsteps running down the street. Backup officers arrived minutes later. They searched the entire neighborhood, but the man was gone, completely vanished. The police investigation lasted for weeks. They collected the photos, the cameras, the notebooks, everything from the neighbor's house. But the strangest part? They never found any official record of him. No driver's license, no property records, no identification. According to the city, the house across the street had been vacant for 2 years, which meant one thing. The man who had been watching me every night was never supposed to be living there. I moved out of that house 2 weeks later, packed everything I owned, found a new apartment across town, somewhere with no neighbors directly across the street. But sometimes, late at night, I still catch myself looking out the window, just in case, because the police never caught him, and the last photo they found at his camera was taken the night I left. A picture of my new apartment building, taken from across the street. Some stories are more than just scary. Some stories make you question what's really happening in the world around you. What if the person you see every day is watching you? What if they've been following your routine for weeks, months, maybe even years? I hope you never have to find out the hard way. If this story gave you chills, don't just leave yet. Like this video to show your support and help more people uncover hidden stories like this. And if you want to stay on the edge of your seat with more creepy, real-life stories, subscribe to Hidden Stories by Banki and turn on the bell so you never miss the next terrifying story. Now tell me in the comments, would you notice if someone was watching you every night? Stay alert, because sometimes the scariest things happen right in your own neighborhood.